Part 1: The Departure. November 1998, Harare, Zimbabwe. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and early summer heat. Purple jacaranda petals floated down like silent witnesses, carpeting the sidewalks, softening the sound of hurried footsteps and hard decisions. At Harare International Airport, Tariro stood with a suitcase in one hand and a storm in her chest. She was just 26, a nurse in training, a separated woman, and most of all, a mother. Her boys Kuda, 5, with eyes full of questions, and Kunde, still in nappies, too small to understand, stood beside her mother, clinging to the folds of her chitenge. She looked at them, her heart split in two. How do you say goodbye to the only two reasons you've survived? How do you walk away, knowing it might be months, or even years, before you can hold them again? But what choice did she have? Back home, the whispers had already begun. She left her husband. A woman who leaves must want the streets. No matter what, you stay. You endure. For the children. Endure what? Bruises? Broken promises? Tariro had endured enough. Her marriage had been a slow suffocation. Love twisted into control, into silence, into survival. When David stopped being a partner and became a shadow that hovered in fear, she made the hardest decision a woman could make in her world. She left. And now, with this ticket to London in her hand, she was walking into the unknown. She bent down, kissed Kuda's forehead, then held Kunde against her chest a little too long. Mama's going to make a way. I'll come back for you. I promise, she whispered. But promises weighed differently when carried across oceans. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, Tariro turned, slowly, not because she doubted the decision, but because leaving them felt like leaving her own breath behind. She walked toward Gate 5. Each step echoed louder than the last. She didn't cry until the plane lifted off. Only then did the tears come, hot, quiet, full of guilt, full of longing. She wasn't running away. She was running towards something. A life where she could stand on her own. A life where her children would grow without fear. She wasn't just leaving Zimbabwe. She was leaving behind a story written by others, and flying into the unknown to write her own.
Part 2: The Stigma. Back in Zimbabwe, the news of Tariro's separation had already taken on a life of its own. In her community, a divorced woman was not seen as brave. She was seen as broken. There was an old saying whispered in kitchens and at church meetings. A woman without a husband is like a house without a roof. To leave a marriage, no matter how toxic, no matter how cruel, was to invite shame into your home. And the shame did not stay at your doorstep. It followed you everywhere. The whispers were not gentle. She must want to be free for men. No decent woman walks away from her husband. Some said it with a smirk, others with pity, but all of them carried the same message. You should have stayed. They never asked what she endured. They never wanted to know. In their eyes, a woman's duty was simple. Endure everything, bear everything, for the sake of keeping a man's name. Even those closest to her offered the same advice. You should have stayed, Tariro. No matter how bad it was. Think of your children. But what they didn't understand was this. She was thinking of her children. She didn't leave because she wanted freedom. She left because she wanted life, for her and for them. Yet still, the stigma clung to her name like dust after a long, dry walk. And even in the bustling streets of London, thousands of miles away, she could still feel its weight on her shoulders.
London, December 1998. The cold hit her first, a biting, icy wind that cut through her thin Zimbabwean sweater and made her breath curl into the air like smoke. She stepped off the coach at Victoria Station and looked around at a city wrapped in gray skies and flickering street lamps. This was her new world. Tariro moved into a cramped flat in East London, sharing a single bedroom with two cousins. The wallpaper peeled in the corners, the heating worked when it wanted to, and the air smelled faintly of damp carpets and someone else's cooking. But it was hers, for now. By night, she cleaned hospital corridors, pushing a mop past rows of sleeping patients, her mind half on the floor and half on the faces of Kuda and Kunde back home. By day, she became a student again. Long hours in small classrooms, taking notes in careful handwriting. her dreams tucked between every line of her notebook. She lived on instant noodles, hope, and silent prayers whispered into her pillow before sleep. Every freezing morning, she reminded herself, this is the price of building something better. She was far from home, far from her boys, far from the warmth of the African sun, but she carried Zimbabwe in her heart, and the promise of a better tomorrow in her hands. July 2002, London. 4 years. 4 years of night shifts, textbooks, and tears hidden behind closed doors. 4 years of cleaning floors by moonlight and studying under the weak glow of a bedside lamp. And finally, she had done it. Tariro was now a registered nurse. She held the certificate in her hands, its embossed letters a quiet promise that all her sacrifices meant something. At last, she could start planning the next chapter, bringing Kuda and Kunde to the UK, reuniting the family she had been forced to scatter. But just as she began to dream aloud, the phone rang. The voice on the other end carried news that knocked the air from her lungs. Back in Zimbabwe, her mother-in-law, my David, a woman who had never hidden her contempt for Tariro, had taken her children from her mother's care. She claimed it was for their own good, but Tariro knew better. This was not about the children's welfare. It was about control, about power, about punishment. Her hands trembled as she ended the call. The walls of her small London flat suddenly felt too close, the air too heavy. She had crossed oceans, endured freezing winters, and worked herself to exhaustion. But freedom was still just out of reach. Back in Zimbabwe, Tariro's absence became the perfect opening for her mother-in-law, my David, to step in. She didn't just take Kuda and Kunde from their grandmother's home. She took them into a world where Tariro's name was spoken only in anger. My David had never liked her. In truth, it had always felt less like a relationship between in-laws, and more like a rivalry for the same man. Now, with Tariro far away in London, she began a different kind of battle. At church gatherings, she spoke in hushed tones to anyone who would listen. At community events, she dropped poisonous words disguised as concern. She left her children. She chose herself over her family. She is not the kind of woman you should trust. The lies traveled quickly, carried on lips eager for gossip. Soon, even the children felt the weight of those whispers. They were forbidden to eat anything from their maternal grandmother's house. Though she was the teacher at their school, it was not discipline. It was punishment designed to erase Tariro's presence from their lives. But oceans away, in a small London flat, Tariro was still their mother, and she would not let the war of words decide the truth. In the dusty courtyards of the village, at the busy gates of the church, and beneath the shade of the big marula tree, where neighbors gathered, the whispers grew sharper. My David, with her headscarf tied high and her voice just loud enough to be overheard, told her version of the story. Tariro ran off with men in the UK. She abandoned her own children. She's a disgrace to our family name. Some nodded in quiet agreement, eager for gossip that made their own lives seem cleaner. Others simply kept their distance from Tariro's family as if shame could spread like a sickness. And in the middle of it all were Kuda and Kunde, too young to understand the politics of adult grudges, yet old enough to feel the sting of every side glance and whispered insult. They were no longer just children. They had become pawns in a war of words they never started. Every morning, Kuda and Kunde walked to the school where their maternal grandmother taught. They saw her in the classrooms, in the staff room, even in the corridors, yet they could not run to her. They could not share lunch from her table. They could not sit in her kitchen after school. They could not feel the comfort of her arms. At home, the words were relentless. Your mother doesn't want you anymore. The message was repeated so often, it began to sink into their young hearts. And over the phone, Tariro felt it. Her sons' voices grew quieter. The laughter they once shared faded into awkward pauses. Conversations became short, polite, distant. For Tariro, thousands of miles away in a cold London winter, every call ended with a silence that screamed louder than any insult. She was their mother, but she was slowly being erased from their world. In London, Tariro's days were filled with the bustle of hospital wards and the weight of other people's pain. But when the shift ended, when the uniform came off, she faced her own private wounds. Letters from home grew shorter. Phone calls became less frequent. And when they did come, her sons' voices carried hesitation, like they were speaking to a stranger. She sent money. She sent clothes. She sent love wrapped in every parcel. But nothing could cross the invisible wall being built between them. It was a battle she fought in silence, no bandages for the hurt, no medicine for the ache, just hope, and prayers whispered into the quiet of a small London flat. By 2003, the distance between Tariro and her sons was no longer just in miles. It was a distance carved by words sharp, poisonous words whispered into their ears, repeated in churchyards and spread at community gatherings. But Tariro was not one to remain silent forever. One evening, her hands trembling as she held the phone, she dialed the number she had long avoided, and on the other end was the woman who had become her fiercest enemy, her own mother-in-law. "My David." The conversation began quietly, cautiously, but quickly unraveled into truths too heavy to stay buried. Tariro's voice quivered with pain but rose with determination. "They are my sons. I carried them. I left to build them a future. Don't twist my sacrifice into shame." But my David's reply was cold, unyielding. "A true mother never leaves. I was here when they cried. I was here when they hungered. They are mine now." The words hit like stones, cruel, calculated. But Tariro did not back down. For every accusation, she answered with truth. For every insult, she held her ground. The line between them crackled, heavy with unspoken history, with years of misunderstanding and resentment. And when the call finally ended, nothing had changed on the surface. Yet deep inside, something stirred in Tariro, a fire, a resolve. She knew this was no longer just about survival in a foreign land. It was about reclaiming her place as a mother, about fighting for the bond no distance, no lie, and no bitterness could ever truly erase. The years apart had scarred Tariro, but they had also shaped her. She had crossed oceans. She had endured the sting of cold nights alone in a foreign city. She had bent her back to hard work, trading sleep for study, hunger for hope. And though lies threatened to sever her bond with Kuda and Kunde, a truth deeper than words still tied them to her. By 2004, Tariro no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance. She was a mother on a mission. Each morning she pulled on her nurse's uniform, but beneath it beat the heart of a warrior, a woman determined to rise above shame, above gossip, above the chains of tradition that had once tried to silence her. She began to save more fiercely, to write more letters, to call with renewed strength. Every prayer she whispered was no longer desperate, it was defiant. She knew her sons were growing older, their minds filling with stories not her own. And yet she believed, with an unshakable faith, that one day truth would break through. Tariro's journey had begun as an escape, a flight from a broken marriage and a stifling society. But now it had become something greater, a fight for dignity, for motherhood, for a legacy her sons would one day understand. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her fire, a fire that would carry her through the battles still to come.